I will be the first to admit I didn't always address it right away, and I always regretted it.
You're listening to the How Manufacturers Improve podcast, hosted by me, Kirby Sneen with the Manufacturers Alliance. If you've ever wondered how manufacturing leaders have become so successful, then you're in the right place. In each episode, we cover the successes and lessons learned of industry leaders, then break it all down into actionable insights. This episode is all about why managers wait too long to address bad behaviors. Enjoy. All right, here we go. Monica, thank you so much for joining me to sit down to do another podcast. Excited about today's topic, which is...
why managers wait too long to address bad behavior.
That's right. A lot of managers do wait too long. And I think there's a number of reasons, so I'm excited to get into a handful.
Yep.
Maybe the top reasons. Not all of them, but the top reasons that we see manufacturers face when it comes to addressing bad behavior. You know, the first one I actually wanted to dig into a little bit was just how to handle bad behavior from a quote unquote high performer. And so those high performers, I think it's tough for people out there. In fact, I know it's tough because they say, well, it feels like they're untouchable. You know, this person is got a lot of individual output, and we don't want to screw that up because we've got schedules and we've got customers that have high expectations. And so we want to meet those expectations and meet, you know, the hour by hour or the PVA board so that everything's as green as it possibly can be. But in thinking about this one, I think the big shift here is that high performers who destroy culture are actually expensive, not valuable. So I think that's the mindset shift that actually needs to happen first.
I definitely agree. And one thing we often don't think about is we also tend to promote high performers. And they often just even have a little bit of unofficial leadership because they are a high performer. People are following them, whether you want them to or not. So all of your employees are watching them and following by this bad behavior example. So it really compounds all of that cost, like you just said, into a really bad culture and becomes toxic at some point. And it really does need to be dealt with. And I know in my past, I will be the first to admit I didn't always address it right away, and I always regretted it. And it's also hard to address it after you've let it go for too long.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So it's finding, especially with the high performers, you need to find a way to address it with them in a way that moves the team forward. Because in general, high performers do like to help the team. They're there and they have high output because they want to succeed. So if they can see the team succeeding by changing their behavior, that tends to move them a little bit in one way. But as soon as you promote them, boy, you really have to nip that bad behavior in the bud because you don't want that on a leadership team.
Yeah, look out. You know, a quick story. This was 15 or so years ago, and we had an individual that I worked with who was a high performer. I mean, she could output work like it was nobody's business, but there's a big but here, but had explosive behavior. And so what I found and what I observed was that the individual at the time that was managing supported her, wanted to support her, and was prepared to deal with it, acknowledged it, and didn't wait. But boy, did it take a long runway to be able to address it. It went so far as to be able to even provide counseling for the individual to really understand, like, what's behind this explosive behavior? Like, what are the causes, right?
Right.
And it wasn't like a single root cause, like 5 why. It was just a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
And so it took weeks and months and even a couple of quarters to like really fully unpack it and digest it.
Yeah.
But I saw a good example in leadership that said, hey, like, this is not okay, but I do want to invest in you. And we're going to take action together to make improvement. So that was a really good example for me to see. It made me think about how my expectation is high performance and aligned behavior, not one or the other.
Right.
So just being firm about that.
Yeah, totally agree. And you mentioned that management was behind that change, and management does need to be behind that change, because in my past, the high performer did have a long runway, and they let them get away with a whole heck of a lot because they were a high performer, and we don't want to lose them. So we let them get away with a lot. And if you don't have that management support that's going to be behind you as a supervisor, or manager, or leader, it's even harder to have a conversation, let alone bring in counseling or whatever that looks like you said, with your employee. Because you can't do it alone. As a supervisor, you can address one person's bad behavior, but you really do need all of management's and HR's support behind you.
Let's hang out there for a second, because a lot of team leads are probably supervisors who are expected to do something, but don't have their manager's support, or maybe not even HR support.
Right.
What do? Well, I think it makes me think about what they don't do first. Like, they don't say or do things that say, like, you have bad behavior. Like, that's just, that's almost like a personal attack.
Right.
I think the technical term would be like an ad hominem attack. Like, it's just not going to get you anywhere.
Yep.
What you do and what you do say is document, like, the actual actions, the actual metrics, or the actual impact to performance.
Yep, the facts.
So, they interrupted 3 team members during this team meeting at this time. Maybe that's something, right? Or maybe they say they missed 3 shift handoffs, or maybe they something like, hey, they completely ignored this part and be specific in standard work. It was expected to happen on Tuesday at 2 and it didn't happen. But those kinds of observable behaviors and measurable impact towards performance, that's what you do and that's what you say, even if management or HR doesn't support you.
I totally agree, and really stick to facts. Emotions have, unfortunately, only complicate it. So sticking to the facts of they did this exact thing, this is how it affected others, not necessarily the emotion of it, or, Sally left the room crying, is important, yes, but this is what they actually did to make Sally leave the room crying.
Yeah. What did you do?
I did a lot of things.
We could go back there later. Yeah. Maybe we
all
come
of
back
Monica's
to that.
bad behaviors.
I'm sure there's nothing. I'm sure there's nothing there.
We all have paths and paths, and we also need to reflect on what we've done. Because probably my bad behavior when I was a manager and director was not addressing some of these bad behaviors.
Here we go. Here comes the social media clip right here.
Right here. I do regret some of the things that I did when I was in. Now, regret might be a tough term, but looking back at it, I know I would have dealt with things differently now with the 6, 7, whatever years of separation I have from my management days. I would definitely do things differently, and I would have addressed some bad behaviors earlier on.
The tough part is I think every manager's line is a little bit different. Where they say enough's enough.
Yep.
There is like that does vary. There's some natural variation there.
There definitely is, because I do think that managers all manage very differently, and some people just have more of an ability to not just shove things under the rug, but the line is in a different place for people, for sure.
Right. And some of our instructors and some people in the MA network would say, well, it's actually not that difficult to deal with bad behaviors if you're good at adapting your style to their needs.
Sure.
The quicker you can do that and the easier you can do that, the less of an issue anything could become. So I think there's some merit to that thought too.
There definitely is some merit there. Yeah.
So then how do we address behavior issues when we are behind or we are just understaffed? I think that's a really big one because of the production schedules, the timetables, the Gantt charts that say this has got to be done by this date. I think that's a top issue. Honestly, the big thing that I've done is I've burned the candle on both ends. I'll admit it. The only thing that initially came to my mind is, well, I know I need to deal with this and I know I'm behind. So I'm going to put in a little extra here and a little extra there, and I'll just grin and bear it for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Sometimes it's been 5 or 6 weeks. And that's kind of how I've gone about it. Hey, real quick, before we get an answer to this next question, if you're interested in leadership development topics like this, and you want to learn what your peers are doing to develop others, check out our HR community group. Don't miss out. Click the link in the show notes. It's specifically for HR business partners in manufacturing that are always looking for a better way. If that's you, join us. All right, let's get back into it.
Yeah. I do think, especially when you're under the gun, when you're behind, understaffed, all of those things, it's even scarier to address some of the bad behaviors, but it's also when all of the bad behaviors come out. If you think about, especially in manufacturing, when you're under the gun and, it's the 31st of the month and you're trying to get everything out the door to make all of your metrics, right? Mm-hmm. Some bad behaviors come out. That's when the yelling happens. That's when the salespeople are down at the floor, yelling and screaming that their customers, whatever, right? It's where all the bad behavior comes out, for sure. Mm-hmm. And it really needs to be addressed right then and there. Maybe not formally. Maybe it's not a formal write-up with HR and the whole, ball of wax behind it, but it does need to be addressed immediately. And that's one thing with bad behaviors is if you don't address it immediately, that person doesn't even know what they did.
Oh, right. They'll just
forget. It needs to be shut the door. We're having this conversation right now, because that's when the emotions are high and that's when everyone's remembering the circumstance around the bad behavior. So addressing it immediately, especially in those busy, understaffed times, it's not being afraid that person's going to walk out that door, because in reality, they're creating a culture that other people are going to walk out the door.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in terms of like what matters most, I would say it's speed and consistency.
100%.
Like you've got to be able to say something quickly. And if they don't understand the standard, here's the standard. Here's what good looks like. You got to be able to exemplify it. And then you got to be consistent too, because if you're like, oh, let that slide, but not that, then people start to go, oh, that's great. This is how I'm treated, but not them. They get to underperform, but I don't. And they get to say this, but I don't. So yeah, it can get ugly quick if you're not quick and consistent.
Yep. And it's also not moving the bar very quickly. So if you've let a behavior slide for somebody for years, you can't just move the bar on them without telling them you're moving the bar. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you do really have to say, this behavior, it's been going on for way too long. We haven't addressed it properly in the past. Mm-hmm. That's honesty.
Yeah.
This is your new bar. This is what we're going to start expecting from you. Mm-hmm. And it needs to change.
I've literally said, I haven't done this or said this in the past to own it. Right. And then I have said, this ends here and now.
Right.
And then you just look them right in the eyes. Mm-hmm. And then you speak to the specific behavior, whatever it is.
Yep.
And then share the why. That way they kind of know, like, okay, great, I get it. In the past, maybe I got away with this and I'm not in the future.
Yep. It is giving them, depending on the situation, it might be giving them a little bit of a runway to improve too. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't just expect the person who maybe had outbursts and anger issues to improve on the spot. Mm-hmm. You do need to give them the tools, the resources, and the time to change as well.
Yep. Yeah. Back to my story about with the explosive behavior. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was months into quarters. But the thing that did change on a dime was the expectation.
Exactly.
That this will improve.
Yes.
Even though you're a high performer, even though sometimes we're understaffed, even though sometimes I'm super busy, doesn't excuse the bad behavior.
For sure.
Okay. What if someone's just not consistent? Like, how do we all of a sudden become consistent? So this one, for me, I think the big thing is to just know, like my mindset has been that if I'm not consistent, I know that I am going to kill trust. Other people on the team will no longer trust me because they immediately think, well, he lets him get away with that, but not me. I don't trust him anymore. It's just like we don't trust a process with a lot of variation. Mm-hmm. We're like, oh, there's too much going on here.
Yep.
So if you've got a manager that's not consistent, trust just erodes. So I think that mindset shift is actually the first and most important thing that's got to happen if they're not consistent.
I definitely agree with that. And to get to consistency, I remember being a new leader, and we just had this conversation with Kelly Hansen not that long ago that you become a new leader, you're promoted to manager, and you think you've arrived and you think you know it all, or you feel like you should know it all, and your employees think you know it all. When in reality, when you're a new leader, you need to work yourself up to consistency. You need to be able to learn what you need to do differently, as well as, you're not necessarily going to make all of the changes right away. You're not going to be the best leader ever immediately. And I think, at least in my past, when I became that manager and all of a sudden it's like, well, I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. I'm the manager. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And when you don't then address some of the bad behaviors, how do you go back to it? Right. And it's really taking a look at yourself and taking a look at how you've handled it in the past and being able to change and adapt and being consistent now. Starting today, I'm going to be consistent, whereas in the past, I maybe haven't been.
Yeah, I had a manufacturing exec on the podcast, I think 3 years ago, and he said it like this: Kirby, I expect myself and others on my senior leadership team to have a high say-do ratio. And the closer you get to 100%, the more likely you're going to be on the executive team. And I was like, oh, that's just a really good way to put it, that say-do ratio, to be consistent. And so then how do you work towards that? How do you measure it? What's your baseline? And to me, it's a matter of saying, okay, well, do I exemplify the core values? And am I following up on all the to-dos that maybe happen in a team meeting? Am I writing those down? Am I checking them off? Am I going back to the team next week saying, yep, this one's done or not done, and here's why, to make sure that ratio is as high as it can be. The other one is standard work too. Like, hey, standard work, the things that need to be done daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, are they actually getting done and contributing what they're supposed to contribute? I think there's something to be said about the consistency there.
For sure. Yeah, I think managers especially and above all need to be very consistent, especially in, if they tell one of their employees they're going to do something, it needs to get done. For sure.
So to recap, I don't know if there's any other big things you want to share, but I would put emphasis on how important it is to have the speed and the consistency. So to be able to, once you see something, say something, and then to be consistent in it. And I think the best way that you can do that is to be prepared. And so you've got to be able to know what good looks like. And I think that should come from core values, at least at the highest level. And then what your standard work is. You should know those things as a manager for each individual on your team, so that then you can quickly go to someone and say, okay, well, this is how we treat each other, or how we don't treat each other, or, less of this specific behavior, more of that specific behavior. And then always just tie everything to performance. If you're ever wondering about well, what should the why be behind this as a manager? You can always just tie it back to performance. Because even as a, individual contributor on your team who is that high performer, but they're having bad behavior, they're thinking, but I'm performing really well. And so you can always tie it back to how it impacts other people's performance. So knowing that is the goal, I think will allow that manager to speak up quickly, because they know the answer is performance.
Right. One thing I would add to that is it takes courage to act quickly, courage to prepare and have that conversation. And thinking of it as having a conversation with an employee is one thing, and having the courage to have that difficult conversation. It just takes a bit of courage and knowing that it's not easy for anyone to have conversations like that all managers do go through that, especially as they're starting out. And even as you get further into your career, difficult conversations and bad behaviors are never fun to deal with. Nobody likes dealing with it, I don't think. Maybe that's just me.
I met one guy one time. Last name was Karen.
But, and I would also say the goal is improving the team. Like you said, the goal of dealing with any bad behavior is trying to hit all of the goals, trying to succeed as a team and as a person in a way that meets the company values as well.
Yeah. As much as what I agree with what you just said, no one likes to do it. I have those thoughts in my head when I'm talking about bad behavior or bad this or bad anything. And yet I don't share them because I'm like, oh, I don't want to make it about me. Have you ever felt that?
Make the bad behavior about you?
Make the conversation.
Oh, sure.
I've always thought to myself, I don't want to say this. This isn't easy for me to say.
For sure.
But I'm going to acknowledge it, even though it may not come out perfectly. And so,
I think to some degree, starting with, this may not come out perfectly. I'm not, I don't necessarily want to tell you this, but it needs to happen.
Yeah.
I once had to have, and it was a silly thing. Somebody was whistling at work. And I know it doesn't sound like a big deal, but you're in an office, you're all on computers and you're trying to concentrate and somebody's whistling.
Yep.
And I had to have that conversation. I loved this employee. And this was not a bad employee by any means, but she was whistling. And I just sat across from her as her manager and said, listen, you're whistling while you're doing this. You probably don't even realize you're doing it. She's like, I whistle? And I had the humility to also say, this is going to not come out right. So I'm just going to say it, and then we'll keep talking until we're both in a good spot. Mm-hmm. Because things don't necessarily come out perfect the first time, especially as new managers, especially as, you're not used to bringing up difficult conversations like this. And this was something that was, I can laugh about it now. And that employee probably laughs about it now too. I mean, if she's listening, she's probably like, yeah, Monica, that was a really bad conversation. But having the humility to also say, I'm not perfect. Yeah. As your manager, I'm not perfect. And there's things that I'm trying to work on too. And as long as we're all trying to get to our best selves, that's what we're going for. Right.
That's a good one. And it's lighthearted too. It's like applicable, but lighthearted with the whistling.
And not making it about yourself, not saying, I really don't want to tell you this, but, or, this is difficult for me. You've put me in a bad spot. All of those things, I definitely watch some of the verbiage, and that's in the preparation. Practicing how you're going to open, at least, is important for me, because I like to practice that. How at least am I going to open the conversation so I know that I've got the words right, and I'm not making it about myself or saying you made me feel bad, or just some of the trigger type stuff you try to stay away from as well.
Like those personal attacks. I know I will often, in fact, 99% of the time, I'll even write down.
For sure.
Like, hey, a sentence or two, I'll look at it. Is this really clear? Is this really going to help them?
Yep.
And am I making it about me, or focusing on their performance and how it maybe impacts the team as well? Just to make sure that it starts off right.
Correct.
I've even gone so far then as to, on occasion, bounce that off of someone else. It says, hey, this is the situation. This is me trying to address the bad behavior, whatever it may be specifically. Does this land okay?
Right.
And I'm sure people listening to this could use that HR leader as a sounding board.
Absolutely. Or their manager, or a coworker, not a coworker, a peer as well. Somebody on the same level who maybe also knows that person and knows their style as well.
Well, this is really good. I appreciate you joining me and talking about this. Why managers wait sometimes too long to address bad behaviors. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been fun.
I'm Kirby Sneen with the Manufacturers Alliance, and this is the How Manufacturers Improve podcast. If you like learning these high-level best practices from experienced peers, and you want your team to be able to connect with people they can trust, see what's possible, and develop new lean and leadership skills when it works for them, go to mfrall.com or just click the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening.